Go ahead. Recording.
Okay. This is a giant cattleya which just dropped one of its large flowers. You can see how big it is. This is a 6-inch ruler. Most of the ones I do are not this large. But this one's very easy to dry because it's large and it has this long stem, which although this one is not hollow, it is hollow from about right here, and then it goes all the way through to the other side and then comes out right in there, which is how it gets fertilized in the reverse order. The first thing you do is get a pair of scissors and cut it about here. And this is true for most orchids that have a hollow stem like this and are easy to work with. Other ones use a whole other method for drying them. Cut it about right here. You can cut it a little closer if you can't see the hollow hole in the back, or if the hollow part is not visible. You can cut it a little bit closer to the back, but cut it too far and these rear petals here will fall off and it won't work. After the stem is cut off, you want to take a needle, sewing needle, with a thin enough eye that it will pass through this hollow hole here in the stem. As you can see, the eye is about that wide. So this should be about perfect. You pick a needle with a flower this size that is smaller, you have problems. It's hard to dig the needle out from the front of the flower. If you pick a needle with an eye that's wider, you may end up damaging this hollow tube in here, and you don't want to do that either. And then you take some very, very thin monofilament fishing line. You can use thread, polyester, or cotton, but I like to use the monofilament line because when it dries, those organic juices in the flower will often stick to thread of any kind. So plastic is like a non-slip, or I should say more like a Teflon pan versus steel or cast iron. Thread the needle with really thin, this is 8-pound test monofilament. Really, really cheap. Got it at Walmart. You just want to thread the needle. And don't cut the line yet, just leave it on the spool because later on you can cut the line when you're finished. Just make sure there's enough of this extra here so that, and do not knot the line around the needle, or else you'll have to pass a big knotted line through there as well. You insert it through the tube in the back. Let's see if you can see that. Turn it this way a little bit. And you won't encounter much resistance, but when you start to encounter slight resistance, you want to flip the flower over to the front and as carefully as you can, you want to look for the end of your needle. And right here, I've gone much further than I needed to. You can see the needle there coming out the front of the flower. I'm going to back it up a little bit. You can see the needle here. Don't pull too far back on this part of the flower here, or you'll break this part off and will not look right. Just as carefully as you can, push the needle through. Try not to pierce any parts of the flower. My needle's almost not long enough. Just carefully, gently, and slowly pull the needle through. And this one's being stubborn. Oh, and by the way, you want to use a flower that you've either just picked off your plant or one that has just fallen on its own, like this one. It works much better to pick the flower before it starts to wilt on its own, and it will dry with more color that way. I now have the threaded flower here. All right, when you have your flower threaded, you want to have maybe at least 6 inches of line on both sides, but I like to do more of it, at least a foot or longer, depending on where you're going to hang this. You can dry it sideways, you can dry it upside down like this, which is usually the best way, at least with this type of flower, because the petals dry open. If you dry it in this way, the flower will tend to follow gravity as it dries, and it will look like it dried while the flower was closing up or just opening. So with these, if it's a stiff petaled flower, you want to bear that in mind when you choose the drying position. Now, I have a cat, and our special kitty has her own little closet where we keep her litter box, and the presence of the ammonia in that room, when the door is closed and the cat door is always open so she can get in there. But the presence of the ammonia in that room helps maintain the color. And if you want to build yourself a box to dry flowers and put in there a bottle of ammonia, you can do that. But you want to make sure that this is out of UV light when it dries, and that you do not change the position of the flower as it's drying unless you absolutely have to, or unless it's drying in a way that is not satisfactory to you. And over time, and once it's finished with the UV exposure, it will get more and more brown or gray, you know, and the colors will not be as bright. So when you're going to use these, when they're dry, you want to keep that in mind. If you put it in the light, it's going to fade in color much more rapidly. So if you do choose to dry it in this manner, you want to just make sure that it's not touching anything else, including a wall or another flower. If you want to do a string of these on the same line, that will work as well. I've done that before with success. So you kind of just have to play with it, experiment with them. But always, if your flower has a hollow stem, you always want to try to go through the stem and out the front without even damaging any of it. They will look great, and this works especially well with orchids. So I'm going to show you a flower that I dried from this plant previously, and this one dried upside down even though it was fully open when I began to dry it, and you can see the flower looks like it's closed up. This one's also been exposed to UV, and you see how you can only see just a little bit of purple there around that fringy lip, and this one obviously is not not the ideal result. And this one here dried a little bit in the same manner. It looks like it's closed up a little bit. And I think I dried this one upside down as well, but you can see the veins very well, but the color is just drained. And it'll turn more and more white, more paler, more ghost-like the longer I expose it to sunlight, and you don't really want that either. So that's it. Each flower can take vastly different amounts of time to dry, but if you want to wait until your flower feels completely dry, every part of it, the thicker and juicier the part is to begin with, those are the parts, the internal parts, that you want to make sure are completely dry before you unstring it. Right, I'm talking about this section through here. When these are completely dry is when you want to pull it off this line. And airflow when you're drying them, you want as little as possible, especially if you have ammonia in there, but watch it with the ammonia. Don't do anything dangerous. Don't spend a lot of time inhaling it or anything like that. You do want to have ventilation if you're using ammonia to dry these. So I think that's everything. Good luck if you endeavor to try this. Some will be successful, some will not, and it may not be your fault. Sometimes you just get a flower that just crumbles once it dries and the petals will drop. And if you've done this correctly, even when you do, that does tend to happen sometimes, and you're just gonna have to try again. It's gonna happen and there's nothing you can do about it. So don't get down if you have problems the first 5 or 6 times you attempt to do this. All right, and that's about it. Good luck.